I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I've watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All these moments will be lost in time, like tears in the rain. Time to die. I'm Eddie Webb,
And I'm Chris Spivey.
and today we're going to talk about Blade Runner here on Genreless. Hello, and welcome to our new season, short season, seasonette. I don't know what we call this.
I like to seasonette myself.
Seasonette. This next little bit of Genreless.
Do we want to tell them how many episodes a seasonette is, or do we think we're going to do what we always do and either add or remove at the last minute?
Oh, see, we absolutely have to just modify it. It won't be. It'll be less than the 8 or 10 we usually do. Let's put it that way. Unless, of course, we end up deciding to do 8 or 10, then ignore this. Pretend this never happens.
So part of the reason for this short mini run is it was a larger run that has been on the list for a while.
Mhm.
I think it was a 16 episode run, maybe.
At one point, yeah.
And then when we looked at it again, it was like, well, it could be shorter than that. Like this could be its own thing. And then after doing so much fantasy, taking a mini break in there for a little speechless, we wanted to get a palate cleanser before we move on to a longer season. That longer season is TBD. Some people think it may be a Western season. Could be, but that's 20 odd episodes. I don't think I've convinced Eddie to do yet. It could be about detectives. Could the 80s romantic rom-com detective shows like Remington Steele.
Can it be a Western detective rom-com?
I bet that exists somewhere. I just don't know of it.
Probably.
We could instead do an entire season of every episode of Maverick from beginning to end.
I would die before we finish that. Because there's like, what, 1,000 episodes of Maverick?
Something like that. Or Gunsmoke, I think, is the one that you would really die over.
No, Gunsmoke's the one I'm thinking of, yeah.
Because we'd have to start with the radio show, then transition into TV. And I think the radio show lasted as long as... No, the TV series lasted longer than the radio show in the end. To there.
Yeah, or we could do like every episode of Dark Shadows.
Oh my God.
That lasted forever. That was like every episode a day, 5 days a week for years.
We'll just go back into the Dark Shadows, I think, from the late 90s, early 2000s. That was about 8 episodes.
Right, there I go. Just knock it out.
We can finally do the soap opera run that I want, and you'd have to watch Peyton Place, and then we talk about like Days of Our Lives and All My Children.
I mean, I honestly, you keep threatening like I'm gonna be mad about this. It's like I used to watch soap operas when I was a kid, so I mean, like I don't watch them constantly now, but I mean, I think it would be cool to do that at some point in time.
So in short, what we're saying is if you are listeners, we think there are hundreds of you now. I don't know why there are hundreds of you listening to us, but I appreciate it. If you want to suggest a mini run to us, a standard run between 8 to 10 episodes or something you'd like us to cover that is accessible on both the UK and the US side, that at a whimsy we may find interest in, please feel free to do so.
Right. I will just note that EastEnders had its 40th anniversary recently, so...
I've told you I want to watch EastEnders. I've seen a few random episodes.
You're not my mother. No, so this run we're doing a short cyberpunk run, which is honestly something we've been talking about. I think we pitched cyberpunk like back when we first started doing this podcast. I mean, something we've been talking about doing for a while, and then we kind of did the cyberpunk anime run as kind of a sidestep to that. This is more cyberpunk. I won't say live action either. It's going to be just more cyberpunk. It's really.
And for people that have listened to us for a while and know our dips in cyberpunk and stuff, we currently do not have a special guest for Jay or Mike. If that's what you're waiting for, you're stuck with just us. So I would apologize, but that's more than enough.
Right.
We're Knuff.
We're Knuff. Yes. Just appreciate what you have. Damn it. And so it makes sense that we're going to start with Blade Runner, which is kind of the visual starting point for cyberpunk. It's not the literary cyberpunk, although they're contemporaneous. But
what would be the literary starting point?
There is some debate at that point in time, but most people would say that Neuromancer is probably the it was definitely starting from Neuromancer. Whether there was some predecessors is a little more debatable. But William Gibson's Neuromancer is kind of the one that everyone points to of like this is where from this point on cyberpunk became a distinct genre.
Do you want to give a brief recap of the different versions of cyberpunk from different countries? How you and Jay delved into?
Oh yeah, sure. If I remember it now. So there's basically three very rough strands of cyberpunk, um, uh, which is somewhat incorrectly divided into American, European, and Japanese cyberpunk. Uh, American cyberpunk is very much kind of um, what would happen if technology took over our lives and reduced our individuality, mixed with a fair amount of we're terrified the Japanese are going to take over our country, which we will talk about in some level in this movie because that's definitely there. um, Japanese cyberpunk, on the other hand, is um, what if technology helped us to rebuild after our country had been devastated? Because this is a country that's only a few decades out from having the ship bombed out of with a nuke. And so that left a very clear trauma to the popular consciousness. And so cyberpunk, the technology is less worried about taking us over and more how does it change our lives if we use this to rebuild? And British, or sorry, European cyberpunk is kind of in the middle of that because uh, England in particular also had been bombed in World War II, not by a nuke, but so had been bombed. So they had some of the Japanese flavor of we're trying to rebuild our society, but also it's much more insular. American and Japanese cyberpunk both look kind of outwards to some level. European cyberpunk looks a little more inward. Of like, let's rebuild what we have, and how does that change our culture? And again, a little bit of the what would happen if other cultures merging with ours dilute our core culture? What does that look like? So it's a little bit of that American concern, but not specifically focused at Japan, more kind of widespread. Because again, this is a Europe that's not quite ready to make the EU. So there's still a lot of tension of like, what does a European Union look like, and how does that change things? So yeah, those are kind of the three very rough strands of 80s cyberpunk, I should say. And then of course it encourages and intermixes and influences each other throughout the 80s and 90s, and so now we have a slightly more homogenized cyberpunk in the early 2000s, which then begins to break down and diverge. And now a lot of the cyberpunk we see now is a little bit retro, and so cyberpunk as a genre is kind of a much like how we now look at like 70s sci-fi. It's like, oh, that's a bit quaint. It's a bit retro, and that's fun, but it's not tapping into the same anxieties because they're all new anxieties that different strands of sci-fi are now digging into. That's where
Can
all
you
that Starbucks is.
can you explain to me, Eddie, why everyone wants to drop the word punk on the end of whatever their genre thing is?
I blame steampunk. Um, so basically, cyberpunk initially was intentional. It was specifically trying to cleave to the burgeoning punk movement because again, 81, 82, 83, this is when Blade Runner and Neuromancer are kicking in. So punk is, depending on how you define it, either just died or about to die or about to change, depending on how you define punk. Lots of people different ways. But punk was a distinct musical and aesthetic movement in the late 70s. So they're like, what if we did that and applied that aesthetic to science fiction? The cyber part actually came a bit later. Um, so originally it was just kind of let's just write punk sci-fi, and then cyber kind of got added onto it, and that stuck. But then cyberpunk became such a popular term, and quickly got applied again, usually via Blade Runner, to a certain aesthetic. So there's a lot of things that are qualified as cyberpunk visually, but in no way is the story coded as cyberpunk ethos. The example I love to give is Sherlock Holmes in 22nd Century, um, where it's like it is very much visually a cyberpunk, but not at all aesthetically.
it's always interesting that your touchstone for near everything that we do is Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century. At this point, we just need to cover it so that you can feel that it's been addressed.
I would, except for the fact that I would require you to watch it, and I don't know if our friendship would survive such an experience.
You made me watch Penguins with rocket launchers, Eddie. I think our friendship can take a few hits.
We'll see. We'll see. Um, so, but I mean, like, there much is uh, uh, um, a late '90s cyberpunk vibe, which I love. There's definitely a kind of shitty '90s cyberpunk where people thought this was cool and wanted to make stuff like this, but had no idea what they're actually playing with.
Would that be the
In
net
this,
with Sandra Bullock?
yeah, there's the net, there's hackers, Lawnmower Man.
Ugh.
Um,
What about
yeah,
Lawnmower Man 2? The
which is
even better sequel?
yeah, and one of them had Matt Frewer, which is I believe he's cast primarily because he used to play Max Headroom. Um, uh, uh, the Max Headroom show actually is a good example. Not the show Max Headroom, the Max Headroom talk show, where actual real world celebrities were interviewed by a guy who's pretending to be an AI algorithm.
I feel like you've mentioned that show before too.
It's bonkers. Um, I'll get into Max Headroom some other time. Suffice to say, the aesthetics were very popular, even if the themes didn't necessarily go through. And so when people started to find different aesthetics, and William Gibson actually co-wrote a book that used these cyberpunk themes, but set it into the Victorian era. I don't believe he called that book steampunk, but other people took that and jumped right to the aesthetic component of that. That became branded steampunk. And so from there, any kind of time period merged with modern day sensibilities as an aesthetic became dash punk.
So if you don't want to answer this question, you don't have to because I don't want you to get in trouble with a whole bunch of other creatives. Do you think the fact that they're only taking the aesthetic piece of the punk and applying it to whatever their setting or genre piece is what's the right way to phrase it? Diminishes either the work or the concept that is cyberpunk?
For a long time, I thought so. I mean, as an old school, well, not old school, as someone who identified as a punk in his youth.
You can say first generation.
No, I'm not that old. Jesus Christ, I was born first generation. I also was in the wrong country as first generation. More like third or
Don't
fourth wave.
don't let Eddie fool you. Eddie is in fact a Highlander from Scotland,
Right.
and he's been bouncing around now for like a
As you,
couple
t-
centuries.
as you tell from my accent, I'm from Scotland. Yes.
Of course, you're Sir Eddie McLeod Webb.
Right. Um, but over the years, Cyberpunk has done more damage to itself than other people have. So, like to be clear, there are TV shows now that are being produced that tonally, theme wise, make sense to cyberpunk, but they're not branded as such. Westworld, Severance, both of those off the top of my head, are very cyberpunk in storytelling, but are not identified as such because that word has lost all cachet.
Yeah, because for instance, one of the shows that might have been on this list would have been Almost Human with Carl Urban. But looking at it, the show it sort of says it's cyberpunk, but it's not cyberpunk. It's a sci-fi police procedural.
Yeah,
I
and that's
love
the thing
that
is like,
for genres. Our whole thing is like defining what specific genre something is slotted into at this point.
but I mean, honestly, I do think that's kind of, it does speak to our larger mission, if you will, because even though it is a distinct genre, we just pointed out there are things that fall in that genre are not classified as such, and there are things that really shouldn't be in that genre that are classified as such, which is reinforces that genre is ultimately a meaningless label. And so this is kind of another thread of that. So a lot of what I think this run is going to be ultimately is, what did Blade Runner do to media for a while? And so it's a cyberpunk run, quote unquote, but really this is a bunch of people who looked at Blade Runner and said, I want to do that.
So then, what genre would you peg Blade Runner, this 1982 film, into?
So Blade Runner, according to the Ridley Scott, he had always envisioned it as basically just a sci-fi noir. He very much shot it and produced it as if it were a noir film that just happened to be set in the future as opposed to the past. So and there's a lot of overlap, both aesthetically and tonally, between noir and cyberpunk. So they were close cousins for a very long time, at least particularly literary, but also as Blade Runner married them even more firmly. So if you look at the American pulp detective tradition and the American cyberpunk tradition, they're both drawing from each other on some level, right? So if you look at Blade Runner as primarily a noir, a lot of things make sense. Whereas if you try to put it in cyberpunk, it's not really. It's cyberpunk. It's right before cyberpunk. Like there are no real cybernetics in this movie. There are androids. Spoiler. Um, but the idea of someone having a cybernetic implant on them isn't really a thing in this movie.
Where
So
then?
some of the tropes that we associate with it aren't really a presence here.
All right, because you're slotting more for noir and sci-fi, which I can see. Then, where would you slot the brilliant source material, the book by Philip K. Dick, "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," for genre?
Mad surreal comedy, maybe. Because okay, we should probably talk about this a little bit. The story "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" this is based off the story "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," and I say based in the sense that some characters have similar names. That
As
is
in, Scott
basically
heard
it.
about the book and
Right,
never read it. It was like, huh.
right. It's like someone gave him a 2 paragraph breakdown of what the story was about, and he's like, okay, that's cool. I'm just going to throw away half of even this and make my own thing. Um, there are some Dickian moments in the movie. Don't get me wrong. It's an unfortunate adjective, but it's the only one that makes sense. But like Deckard wasn't the detective in the original story, and one of the biggest plot lines is he buys an actual electric sheep because he feels lonely, and then has a debate as to whether the sheep is real or not.
All right. So, do we want to talk? There's so many places we could go, and I almost didn't want to cover Blade Runner.
Really?
That's
Okay.
why it took us so long to get here, because it is a movie that I visually enjoy, and it's not a movie that you can just have on the background. For me, it's a movie I need to watch, but it's also a movie I have a lot of complex feelings for, from the subject matter of the movie film itself. And as a huge Philip K. Dick fan, is another weird approach to it. Where would you like to start? Do we want to talk about Philip K. Dick a little bit? Do we want to talk about Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Do we want to focus purely on the movie?
So I mean, let's briefly talk about Philip K. Dick, but I think we need to focus on the movie because so actually take a further quick step back. Um, there's going to be slightly more research in this episode than we have previous episodes because I've actually literally written an essay about this. Um,
What?
yes,
What was it called?
it was I think it's just called Blade Runner. I don't remember because the essay I don't look it up, man. That's not that important. It is in a book
I
called
But the
Subversive
only
Sci-Fi.
opportunity, the only chance you'll ever see me hype Eddie was right then. And anyone, I don't fucking know. I don't read my own work.
I don't, man.
Please proceed.
That way madness lies. Um, no, it was a book called Subversive Sci-Fi, which is basically an anthology of film essays. In this case, it was science fiction films that subverted the genre. And so other people wrote about things like Star Wars and how it changed sci-fi forever, and other people talked about things, um, it and stuff like that. So I mean, like there are lots of different essays of mine, which is on Blade Runner, and you could buy it through Drive Through Fiction if you want to go check it out. So I have some of this knowledge in my head. 'Cause I actually did actual research for that essay. Um, but to kind of lead into it, like so, Philip K. Dick, uh, his stories were at the time famously unfilmable because he's a very surreal writer, and so as I understand it, he sold the movie rights to his stories, kind of almost in a yeah whatever moment. It's like sure, I'll take the extra little bit of cash because nothing's going to happen. There's no way you guys are gonna make a film out of this. Um, and so when Blade Runner happens, it was kind of a surprise to everyone. Um, but so okay, Blade Runner is hard to talk about for a couple of reasons. I'm sure you'll talk about your own personal reasons why it's hard to talk about, but it's also hard to talk about because there are, depending on how you count them, between 5 and 17 different cuts of this movie. The 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 the, the, the five big ones that most people know about is the original theatrical cut from '82. It's mostly known because it had a voiceover by Deckard and a completely different happy ending for Deckard and Rachel because the test audiences didn't understand the movie and the studio got real weird about it. Then there was a version '86 broadcast on CBS, which actually cut out some of the violence and nudity because it's on CBS. That makes sense. They also added a completely different crawl at the beginning to explain that Deckard wasn't a replicant because apparently this was a point that people were confused on.
Here we go. All right, Eddie.
Well,
You know it was going to come. I didn't know you were going to bring it up.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Then there's the international theatrical cut, which was released at the same time overseas in '82, but it was released in the U.S. in '92. Then it added additional violent scenes, so it actually had more violence than the U.S. broadcast cut, which cut all the violence out. Then there's the director's cut in '92, which is infamous because Ridley Scott, the director, had no impact on it. But it removed the narration and added a scene of Deckard falling asleep at a piano and dreaming about a unicorn, and removed the happy ending. And then we have the final cut, 2007, which is the one that Ridley Scott actually worked on. It was put out for the movie's 25th anniversary. And that is, if you're looking for Blade Runner now, you are most likely going to find a final cut. Most of the other cuts have fallen away into the void. But outside of those, there have been lots of fan edits. There have been different kinds of edits for releasing different broadcast streams, some of which Ridley Scott was involved with, some of which he wasn't involved in. And when the movie actually went out in theaters, it was a failure. It barely broke even. Critics were mixed on it. Most people were confused about it. Many thought it was slow, and they thought that the acting was terrible and the action was barely there. So one of the things that I mentioned in my write up a bit is it's kind of hard to talk about Blade Runner because Blade Runner doesn't really exist as a cohesive film and never has existed as a cohesive film. It's just some shit Ridley Scott threw together and has been constantly muddled with throughout its existence until we finally settled on 2007. We finally kind of figured out a final form of it, but that final form is 25 years after the movie was released and is extremely different from the original version. So the fact this movie even exists is insane. The fact this movie inspired a bunch of spin-offs and knockoffs and set up a whole aesthetical movement to the point where you can tell someone, make a scene that looks like Blade Runner, and they instantly know what you're talking about, is gobsmacking. Is this movie good? Is a very interesting point.
All right. You said all that. Now I'm going to take a step way back to ask you the most fundamental question about Blade Runner that will likely set the tone of this recording. Do you think Deckard is a replicant? Yes or no?
I don't know why people have that conclusion. There's nothing in the film that indicates that is true.
I heard your explanation, but I'm waiting for the Eddie yes or no. I'm going old school.
Oh, okay. Well, so I'm going to say no. I don't think he's a replicant. Because having watched this film a few times now, I feel like this movie has the same problems The Matrix have on some level, which is that Matrix raises some interesting open-ended questions, and then people use those open-ended questions to try to undo what the movie very clearly is trying to tell you. And considering that Blade Runner has very few things that it tells you very clearly, it's really baffling to me that people go, "Oh, well, obviously Decker's a replicant." It's like, what in this movie tells you that Decker's a replicant? When this movie gives you any evidence that he's a replicant? There are 5 characters that are explicitly defined as replicants. Yes, the movie opens up the question of what really is humanity and what is living and who is human. And those are all very good questions, and that's a very weighty thing for the movie to engage with. But there's nothing in the movie that indicates that Decker is a replicant in any way, shape, or form.
Cool. I'm in 100% agreement. That's what I was curious where we're going to fall down at. If we're going to come to virtual blows over a breakdown of Blade Runner, agreed. Although Ridley Scott thinks that Decker was replicant, which is where a lot of it comes from. And that's why
Sure.
the constant re-edits are him trying to make it more and more weight for Decker being a replicant, which is why
Which,
Harrison Ford and he had a massive battle for like decades. But Decker, at least even in the movie, can't be a replicant because that undercuts the entire reason for the story, as it's replicants teaching Decker, who lost his humanity, to have humanity. And I'm not even going to
exactly.
touch on the enslavement piece of this movie yet.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure we'll get there. No, and that's actually my point too. Is that if for some reason you come to say Decker's a replicant, again, I will point out one cut of the movie explicitly tells you he's not, but whatever. Um, if you go with it, then the whole metaphor of the people who hunt down the replicants are more inhuman than the replicants themselves is completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the few really, I think it's the thing that people remember about the movie the most, right? Is like the parallel of both Deckard and uh, Rachel was it? Well, actually, you're right. Deckard, Rachel, and Roy actually all coming to understand their own humanity in parallel is kind of the big central thing of the movie. Like the speech I quoted is probably one of the best death speeches in modern cinema. I mean, it's constantly quoted, constantly homaged, constantly referenced. The only other thing it's referenced more of is I think the Akira motorcycle slide, right? Which
Do you
also
know that
I don't
Rutger Hauer made that speech up himself?
that is not true.
I heard that
Um, that speech, there is a version of that speech in the script, and in fact, the script editor went and talked about what parts they did and didn't cut out. So it was not. Rutger Hauer may have massaged it and may have edited the text a bit, but he did not. He did not edit that.
Awesome. This is a joy now of Eddie having a full, deep knowledge of this from research scholarly perspective.
Hilariously, the Tears in the Rain speech has its own Wikipedia entry on this exact discussion because Wikipedia is a bunch of fucking nerds. But like, so it's again, Blade Runner is kind of baffling to talk about on some level, and we will trust me, we will definitely talk about the plot at some point in time. Um, but part of the reason is because as someone who likes Blade Runner, I have to acknowledge it is a mess of a film. It is an absolute mess. We have talked before about movies that are watchable, movies that are well structured. It is none of this. I'm just right up front about this, right? It is a powerful movie. Again, whether it is good is up for debate. But it is just a bunch of amazing decisions that were done over time. But even then, arguably, Blade Runner is a good movie now in the same way that Cyberpunk 2077 is a good game now, in the sense that a horrible botched version got launched initially, and over time they're able to refine it into something that resembles good.
Other thing to consider though is when this movie is being made, think about where Harrison Ford was. I think this was potentially after Empire or right around Empire. On like incredibly famous action hero Harrison Ford
Hmm.
deviates to do Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And so people are going to come to this movie with an expectation that Harrison Ford is going to be Han Solo in another sci-fi movie. And they do not get that at all.
It is the reverse of Die Hard in that regard, right? You know, it's
Yes.
like they go to Die Hard and they, oh, this could be a funny movie, and it's not. And this is the reverse. It's like, oh, we're gonna see a huge action movie, and we're not.
Which automatically sets a lot of negative reviews going towards the movie, even before you probably get reviewers and everyone else fully engaged with it. There's an expectation of what it's going to be based on Harrison,
Right,
which is an interesting thing to always consider when you're watching it.
right. The other thing that's weird about this movie is that if you had told me it was shot 6 years earlier, the movie makes a much more sense because it does have that kind of slightly languid late 70s sci-fi feel, right? But there's this weird time of post Star Wars sci-fi where I think directors were in denial. Star Trek: The Motion Picture is another great example of this. Of like, no, we can make movies like 2001 that are slow and languid, and people will attract them. And it's like, no, they just don't work anymore. And I mean, again,
30-minute
you know,
ship scene.
right, yeah, or lots of dramatic pauses and conversations, which, if you look at Blade Runner as a noir, again, some of those decisions make a lot more sense because some of the dialogue does feel that. But even that's not true because, again, they're applying the late 70s science fiction aesthetic. Whereas if you look at actual 40s noir, it's much faster paced, it's much snappier, and the conversations in here are not snappy.
So, was the original concept for the movie, though, primarily happening in the interrogation room? Is that where it was supposed to have originally been set until Ridley Scott had the idea to go explore the world?
I believe so. I believe the idea was that he wanted a lot of the movie to be about around the Voight-Kampf, as it were, using the Voight-Kampf as a metaphor for police interrogation, and then building a world more or less around that. And then ultimately, he was kind of pressured into adding some action scenes. And granted, there are two other scriptwriters involved with this, but Ridley Scott was heavily involved in the scriptwriting process. So we're going to use Ridley Scott as a shorthand for the scriptwriting team. There was a lot of pressure. It's like, we need a shootout, we need a gunfight, we need something here, we need a car chase. And so when you get those action scenes, they feel like they're almost reluctantly added. You know, it's like, I guess we have a shootout. Bang, done. There's your shootout. Shut up. Um,
Because
and even the final
not
action scene is much more melodramatic than action.
not to give too much of a spoiler, but Decker, our finger quotes hero, only shoots and kills two women in the movie, and one of them is in the back, and it is a gruesome scene. So it's not even real action, so to say. There's violence that occurs.
Right, right. And it's very much um, the idea of Blade Runner is that everything is meant to be ugly, right? And that's something I think people forget when they think about the Blade Runner aesthetic, is that it's raining, it's dirty, it's lived in, and the violence is ugly. The people aren't good. There are very few good people in this movie. Rachel is only arguably the only good person in this movie, maybe even Roy. But even then, Roy still does some horrible shit. Rachel still straight up lies a number of times. But again, from a noir perspective, everyone being a bit gray makes sense. So if the idea of this is an ugly world with ugly people in it, a lot of it makes sense. But again, because of how this evolved, it built up this reputation. And so I think what happened was a lot of every frame needed to be somehow put back into this movie because we need to see all of this vision. Whereas I've seen some fan cuts of this movie, and you can cut a good 20 minutes of this film and make it nice and pacey, and it actually watches really well, without losing any plot. But because the aesthetics are what's so remembered about this movie, people want to see every frame of those aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
So
And so
again,
you're saying,
it's an important film. It's not good.
but you're saying the entire world is ugly and that it's Blade Runner aesthetic. That is true when you're on the ground and close to the Earth, which they've enforced that like Earth is where everyone's
Oh,
trapped
right,
at.
right, right.
everyone else gets to escape into space. And the skyline shots of this movie are fucking beautiful and fantastic.
No, that's fair. When I say ugly, I'm talking in a very artistic ugliness. But you're also right. When you get to Tyrell and that level of society, there's a very different visual aesthetic. So there's the idea of, you're right, street level is ugly, corporate level or above that, it is extremely aesthetically beautiful. And that's it's a good shout. But the idea is that it's not meant to be a polished sci-fi world. It's one of the reasons why it's pointed to as retroactively put in cyberpunk, because it has the same idea of, the street will find a way, the street will find its uses. This technology feels, I'm going to use the word lived in a lot. I'm sorry for that, but it does feel like this stuff exists. It's real, and it has a use. It's not just something else created to look cool on screen. And the things that are created to look cool on screen are at the level of people who have way more wealth than brains or sense, or people who are living in a fantasy world. There's a very intentional moments of that. But still, I mean, that when most people think about Blade Runner, they're not thinking about the outer colonies. They're not thinking about Tyrell's huge gigantic room. They're thinking of Decker ducking his head under the rain, talking to a street vendor. Those kinds of moments. That's usually what people think of when they think of Blade Runner. But you're right. The flying car scenes. We're getting into the bits of the movie, but what's the point? The flying car scene, the looking out over the city and how the buildings are transformed into this futuristic thing, is probably one of the most homaged visual shots in science fiction media. Again, up there with the Akira slide.
And the influence of Blade Runner just isn't on like the theatrical influence. It goes for books, it goes for like audio plays and everything else. It just spiraled out to an array of things, even into the TTRPG space. This has so much impact and influenced so many games. It is astonishing. And I'm going to give a shout out specifically to a game from my youth that I played that is so heavily influenced by Blade Runner. I'm surprised that the Blade Runner franchise didn't sue them, but they can't because it has aliens in it, and that is Slay Industries. If you play Slay
Yeah.
Industries, at least especially in the first edition of the game, it is Blade Runner through and through.
Mm, absolutely. But also comics, right? Like, comics changed in the mid 80s, and part of it is because of things like Blade Runner. I mean, there was in 10 years after this, we get the Marvel 2099, which is basically Blade Runner but superheroes. Like I said, there was then there was a 90s spike of the cyberpunk aesthetic, and culturally worldwide, that's irreducible from Blade Runner at this point. So again, Blade Runner is such a wild film because it is like Star Wars in the sense that it is a huge tectonic shift in media, just across the board. Media changed after this movie. But when you actually watch it and you kind of go, but why? I mean, it's not, again, I like Blade Runner. I'm super clear. I like this movie. I have grown to really love this film. But watching it now, twice now, critically, it's a mess.
So, Blade Runner, I've given it a lot of credit and a lot of kudos right now, but Blade Runner is an enslavement narrative that they're telling through this lens. And even like when Philip K. Dick wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, that was an undercurrent of it. The movie here amplifies that even more, painfully so, even when I watch it. So that's why I'm always torn when I watch it, because the visuals of this movie are thoroughly engaging. The acting, I think, I don't know how people can insult the acting. The acting is exceptional. We'll never get better acting from Rucker Hauer or Sean Young throughout the rest of their careers. Even Daryl Hannah's acting, I think, is better here than it is in most of her other movies. It is so disconcerting that the pinnacle of their stuff is in a movie that was an utter flop, but has cult status that deals so much with the idea of enslaved people and how they are more human than the people that have become dehumanized. And so they're humanizing the dehumanized humans while still being forced to do labor and die in short lifespans. I'm going to pause there for Eddie, who's studied and researched this, just not me that's watched it a couple times.
So I wasn't gonna touch next. I figured you'd have stronger opinions on that, but yes, there's absolutely is the an early '80s attempt to kind of go, well, slavery is bad because that was a conversation that needed to happen in '82 for some reason. Um, and it's like, no, we know that. You didn't have to spend a whole movie telling us that slavery is bad because we know that. Um, so from a theme standpoint, this is not a complicated film. That's the other thing that I think people get confused by is because it has. I will say the acting is subdued. The acting is not nearly as bombastic as is in other contemporary science fiction films. So some people could look at that and say it's bad. It's not. You're right. It's actually really good acting. It's just it's not loud. I would argue this is probably Harrison Ford's best acting, frankly. Um,
That'd be
it's
harder
certainly
to justify because I'd have to remember all of his movies, and there were so many of them.
fair. I'm also not really with it, but certainly it is up there. It's most memorable acting. Um, but the themes and the plot are pretty clear. But again,
Plot.
like a good noir film, the nuance, it's not the plot's complicated; it's the characters that are complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of very complicated characters in this, and a few not complicated, straight up, obviously evil characters. But even with noir, you occasionally just have some people that this person's just bad because we need to get things moving. Um, uh, uh, I'll save some of this for when we get in there. But I do think that in '82, the discussion of robots as slaves had kind of lost, which is fascinating because the term robot comes from the Russian, which is enslaved worker. So robots were always meant to be a slave allegory. Um, Star Wars has a couple moments where it really walks up to the line of, "Isn't it fun to own slaves?"
But Eddie, in Star Wars, they're not robots; they're droids. So
Well, right,
obviously, it's totally not the same thing that it is.
right, and they're totally different from robots because robot is not a word you can legally protect, but droid is.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, Star Wars walks. Right, I said it. Star Wars walks up to the line and says, "Hey, owning slaves is totally fine and cool." Um, whether it steps over is up for individuals to decide for themselves, but certainly it is not invested at all in that. So I think the idea was Ridley Scott wanted to say, no, we need to unearth this and put it out in front of people again. So from that perspective, is it clumsy? Absolutely. Does it tell us things that we should already know? Yes. Arguably in 2025, maybe people should be having their nose ground into it, saying, no, seriously, this is fucking bad, because clearly you've forgotten this shit. But uh, it go ahead.
It does the trope, one of the tropes that I really hate, though, where they're trying to tell an enslavement narrative and it's talking about enslaved white people. And if you look at the movie, I think throughout the entire thing of the movie, I think I remember seeing one black person. She was in a bar scene. So if I wanted to be generous to the movie, I would say that must mean that all the other black people must be fairly affluent and able to leave Earth. That would be being generous to the film. But
That
as we know, I'm not generous. So,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, also, there are three people of color that have speaking lines in this movie. One is evil, one is dead, and one is a random scientist. So I mean, there's also that problem. I mean, it's a very white film, which is hilarious considering the whole point of the film is that it's about how other cultures have taken over or integrated with Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. So, are you considering Decker's, we'll say, watcher, not really partner, to be evil?
Um, I don't. Okay, let me phrase that. I chose evil kind of flippantly. I don't think he's actually evil, but he is certainly an antagonist.
Correct. I would say antagonistic.
But I was being flippant, being reductive to illustrate a point. But that is a fair shout. No, he's not actually evil. He's Decker's antagonist. Roy is not.
It,
Roy looks like he's the antagonist. He's not. His partner slash handler it is not. Does not look to be his antagonist, but actually is.
and so I am bothered by all of that, and that I'm still able to watch it and enjoy the movie for what it is. It goes back to the same thing for how I can read certain materials. I'm not at all commenting on Lovecraft in this podcast, how I just did. And so it's frustrating, which is why I would rarely watch it with my critical eye, how I did this time around. And the sequel is not much better.
Well, good thing we're not going to talk about that.
And I'm not referring to the novels. I'm referring to the movie that came out in 2017.
Right.
Because I haven't read the novels. I own them. I haven't read them.
Other Blade Runner novels?
Yeah, you didn't like. I think it was written by J.W. Jeter or something another, who was a friend of Dick's. He wrote three sequel novels to this.
So there was a story that was adapted into a movie that then got a novelization from a different author.
3 of them. And I
My
think along, Mark, if I understand how what's happened, he was trying to also line the novels up to be more a bridge between the book story and this, in the movie.
I actually maybe have to check those out because I'm curious to see it because they're very different stories.
Yeah, completely. And the Rachel character, I want to see how he explains Rachel's character, because Rachel in the story is very different than Rachel in the movie.
Yeah. All right. Do you
Should
want
we
me to
talk
actually
about the
start digging
movie?
into this? Yeah. So let's dig into the actual plot now.
Since
Okay.
we've talked just around it for about 50 minutes.
Yeah. To be fair, I think it's going to go pretty quick. But um, in the far off future year of 2019 in Los Angeles, former police officer Rick Deckard is detained by Officer Gaff, who likes to make origami figures, and is brought to his former supervisor Bryant. Deckard, whose job as a Blade Runner was to track down bioengineered humanoids known as replicants and terminally quote unquote retire them, is informed that 4 replicants are on Earth illegally. Deckard begins to leave, but Bryant makes veiled threats and Deckard says stays. The two watch a video of a Blade Runner named Holden administering the Voight-Kampff test, which is designed to distinguish replicants from humans based on their emotional responses to questions. The test subject, Leon, shoots Holden on the second question. Bryant wants Deckard to retire Leon and 3 other Nexus 6 replicants, Roy Batty, Zora, and Chris. So we have the initial crawl, the opening setup, and all the way up through the police officer. Definitely don't have to worry about propaganda on this one, that's for sure.
Why is it called Blade Runner, Eddie? The novel's called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
I don't think Blade Runner is even a term in the original book, is it?
It's not.
No, it was made up
So,
for this movie.
from what I know is, I think, if I remember right, there was another book that they had about a Blade Runner, and Blade Runners for them were like medical smugglers. So essentially, they smuggled medical equipment, and they
Oh,
liked the name Blade Runner, and they liked this story, so they stole that name and popped it onto this movie.
sounds a bit like how the Johnny Mnemonic movie is a mashup of 2 completely different William Gibson short stories.
Which I like the name Blade Runner. It is
Yeah.
iconic.
Oh, it is. It's a fantastic name, but you're right. Like, it makes no sense in world.
Yeah, because in the original story, he was just a bounty hunter.
Right. Yes. Was he also like a former insurance investigator or something like that?
That I don't remember. I know that he was trying to earn enough money so they could buy the sheep for his wife, who was a little
Right.
depressed.
Right. Okay. No. Yeah. I'm thinking of a different story.
Since do you remember what happens? Because he gets the money after killing enough of them to buy the sheep.
Right. And he gets the
It's a
sheep.
real
And then,
sheep. Do you remember what happens?
Doesn't he like become obsessed with the sheep after a while?
If I remember right, he ends up sleeping with Rachel and saying that they love each other. And in fact, it's a ploy that Rachel uses to have other bounty hunters stop hunting replicants. Rachel shows up at his apartment, kills his sheep,
I had forgotten that.
and then he finds like a little turtle or something in the woods. There's a whole Mercer subplot.
Yeah, yeah. I do recommend going and reading to Andrew's Review of the Hunter Sheep. It is actually a perfect Philip K. Dick book. It just has no real relation to this movie.
And if you want some other good Philip K. Dick, I think Ubik is how it's pronounced, is exceptional. It is trippy as fuck, but exceptional.
Right. So this chunk of the movie is actually a really good illustration because we've talked before about it's long and it's languid, and you see a lot of that in this early part. But you have to remember a lot of that was because originally there was narration here. So when you have 5 minutes of nothing but music playing, it's because Deckard's talking a good chunk of that time.
But it's Vangelis. Vangelis wrote, without Vangelis, this movie does not work. The music is what
No, I
keeps you
agree.
pulled into the movie.
I agree. If it hadn't been for that amazing soundtrack, this would be unwatchable. It's not. It's engaging, but as you go through this movie, you think about why are there just long stretches of nothing happening? It's because there was narration that was all cut out.
Do you miss a narration?
No, I don't. I
Do
have
you?
seen a version with the narration, and it's not good.
Is it not good because Harrison Ford read it crappily because he didn't want narration in it, or is it just not good because of the writing of the narration?
Mostly mostly A. It's been a long time to watch it, so I'm going by memory. But if I remember correctly, he had a very flat delivery of narration,
On purpose.
which, right, and yeah, since I'm right that he didn't want it, so he kind of on purpose. But when everything, this other thing is also is I get why ultimately was removed because if you want a movie about ambiguity, and then you have a narrator telling you this is what happens, that makes it hard for ambiguous things. We're now at a point culturally where I think an unreliable narrator, literally in this case, would be viable. In fact, the first season of Doom Patrol relies heavily on a literal unreliable narrator. I mean, I think that could have worked, but that wasn't what narration was doing. Narration was just telling you shit you're already seeing on the screen.
Yeah.
So it's again, slightly older. I mean, if they're going for noir, right? And noir has a lot of narration, but in noir movies, when you have those narration, it's because it's explaining things to you that you can't see on the screen. So it was put in there because not because it had a purpose, but because it was an aesthetic, and that's the wrong reason.
One of the things really about films over the years is they've changed, progressed. They've taught audiences how to watch them. And if you are a revolutionary film, audiences don't know how to watch you. And I think that was part of the problem with Blade Runner and why they had to add the narration originally.
Right.
To try to
I think
help
so.
teach people how to watch the film. And now that it's stripped away, decades later, it is easier for us to understand what's going on, even if we hadn't seen it before, because we've learned not the craft, but how to watch and engage with different types of media. That's where we've progressed to as a society.
Well, also you have a weird catch-22 happening here, right? Because like in '82, no one ever seen anything of Blade Runner, and Blade Runner, as we've said previously, changed the thing. Now there have been so many homages to Blade Runner that we now know how to watch Blade Runner because all of media has riffed off of Blade Runner, right? So it's like watching Citizen Kane and going, "Wow, the twist is not really the big of a twist." Like, well, of course, it's Citizen fucking Kane. You know, it started a lot of that twisted, big twist at the end drama. So of course the twist is very obvious because everyone's been riffing off that twist for decades. you know.
Then does Blade Runner fall into the homework category for movie watching?
Honestly, the first time I watched, no, I think maybe the second time I watched Blade Runner was in a film appreciation class. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a case of if you are a certain kind of fan, um, you eventually have to end up watching this or you get pieces of it. Actually, let me tell you an anecdote, which is actually very enlightening for me. Um, I have listened to, and I've occasionally mentioned this podcast, but there's a podcast called Sonic the Comic the Podcast, which is about a Sonic comic book in the UK in the 90s, which is, you would think, is not at all anything related to me. But the co-hosts end up talking a lot about British pop culture in the 90s and early 2000s. So it's extremely helpful and useful from that point. I think it's really exciting. But one of the things they talk about is that they grew up at a time where the Star Wars films were not being re-released on VHS, and the new Star Wars movies hadn't come out yet. So, but the comics were being written by people who were about 10 years older than them. So there are lots of Star Wars references in the comic that they, being kids growing up, had no clue what they were references to.
Hmm.
And so by the time they got around to watching Star Wars, they knew what a Death Star was, they knew what an X-Wing was, they knew all this stuff before they even watched the films, because other comics and media they're watching were referencing it so heavily, they felt like they kind of knew the movie before they even saw the movie. Blade Runner is the same way.
Cool.
Except when you actually watch it, you realize, oh, there's actually whole chunks of this that the parts that aren't being homaged. That's like, wait, what? So I mean, it's like you feel like you're in the movie and you really don't. But you're right. Like, it's this weird thing of like, the audience need to be trained how to watch the movie, and so it turned out to be a temporary measure to get them to understand the movie they're watching that was then stripped out, and now it's such an iconic film that people no longer need that clutch, partially because it's already been referenced.
Mm-hmm. Love it. So the actual opening scene, even if it was just music, I love it because it's showing you the shots of the city and everything else, and it's pulling you into what's going to happen. It's a very nice feel to it. Even when you get the back of Harrison sitting there just trying to eat, and he just gets harassed to come to his job.
Right.
And he's
Which
got
is
that
actually,
smirk. Even then, he's got that Harrison smirk. He is a strikingly attractive man in this movie, and that gets a lot of buy-in for the horrible human being you're about to see throughout the rest of this movie.
which is funny because like that scene, you're right. That scene is both endearing, but also immediately tells you what kind of person he is. Because this is a world where lots of people speak lots of different languages. He only speaks English and does the entitled white guy thing of just shouting English louder at people that he thinks doesn't speak the language when he's ordering. So like, if you're not paying attention, it's just a kind of a cute little funny scene of like, and noodles. It's like, it's a cute moment, but also it tells you he's kind of an asshole. you know?
But you get though that he understands Gaff. He's just ignoring Gaff and forcing the person to translate, because at the end the translator doesn't say anything, but he responds to Gaff, who said something.
Well, okay, that's an interesting point. Is the only reason only because Gaff says a name and he recognizes the name, so arguably he doesn't need that name translated. But other instances of the movie imply that Deckard probably at least understands other languages,
Mm-hmm.
if not able to
And
speak
it
them.
goes, and I think that he understands him is that he doesn't want to do the job because he knows he wants him to do, and it goes back into what a dick Decker is that you don't know yet because we haven't run with the character.
Right, because jumping ahead briefly, there is a scene where he's talking to a snake vendor, and the snake vendor's talking in Arabic, and he understands what's being said, even though it's being said in Arabic. So he does seem to understand other languages. So the fact he's ordering in English and belligerently so, and then again does it again to Gaff.
Yep.
Decker's just an asshole.
And you don't know yet. And
Mhm.
it's so beautiful. And that's something that comes through the context, and you go back and look at them later, go, wait a second.
Right.
Good storytelling.
But the one thing that's so mind blowing, but we take it so for granted here, because again, like this is a 82, America thought that it was going to be overrun by Japan economically. And so this movie visually is tons of buildings with Japanese writing all over it. But the little moment of him sitting down at a noodle cart and ordering and eating is the perfect homogenization of America's obsession with street food, with hot dog vendors and whatnot, melded with the Japanese obsession with street food. And it's done so seamlessly, so organically that, and again, because noodle carts in American streets is such an homage to reference, it's hard to realize how mind-boggling juxtaposition that moment is for audiences who are not familiar with it.
Hmm.
The fact that he just very comfortably goes up to a Japanese noodle vendor, even though he's talking in English, sits down, he's eating noodles, and this is all just a part of his daily life, as if he were going to a burger stand to order a burger.
So much storytelling. Love it.
Yes, yes. The only other thing is, I was going to mention is another kind of noir nod is the fact that it's set in Los Angeles, which is, as we've talked about in other episodes, a very common setting for noir films.
Yeah. How did you like the debrief with him in the lieutenant's office, essentially getting the rundown of all the different Nexus Sixes with their little stockings on their heads?
That it's that perfect balance of like clearly retro and like what 82 thought was going to be for our future, and then we look back and we're like, oh, that's adorable. I love those moments. There's another infamous moment coming up that I want to talk about, but that's like great. I love those looking like this is how computers look in the future, and it's like you're not entirely wrong, but also you're completely wrong in some ways. Um,
And I
but
want to mention that
yeah,
scene specifically because in one of the cuts, wasn't there originally a misquoting about how many replicants there were, which is some of the reason people thought Decker might have been a replicant.
I think it's everyone it says 5. Yeah,
I think I vaguely remember in one version it was like 6, and they were only counting for 5 or something. I
right,
vaguely remember that. It's been a long time since I read up on it.
right. Um, I do remember that because I know that scene it's one of the few scenes that were cut down in the final cut. And I think maybe they cut a couple lines around that ambiguity. Um, because that was just an error. That was just a straight up error. And people pointed, oh, it shows no, it was just a mistake. Because you're right. Um, if it was intended to imply that Deckard was a replicant, the director would have actually let that line in. But the fact it was cut, no, that just makes the narrative more complicated.
Yep. And
I
the
also
timeline
think
wouldn't work.
I think in the script at one point in time there was a 5th replicant they just cut for time. I think maybe how it got stuck in there.
I think so too.
There's something else you have to know about this movie. This is one of those movies where they were rewriting script pages like hours before shooting.
The more and more that we do these, the more and more that seems to just be like a normal part of the process now.
I know, like before I started doing this, I still in my head thought like, oh, these things are pretty well structured and organized, and I would do this like going, no, they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. It's like here's version 12 of today's script, I was like, Jesus Christ.
Because I recently rewatched Casablanca, and then I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts. You must remember this, and she was talking about how they were making Casablanca and how they were literally rewriting script pages of Casablanca the day of and handing them to actors.
Jesus.
And that movie is an utter mess, and it is astonishing that it became such a classic that it is. And if you haven't watched Casablanca, now seems to be the perfect time to go watch it.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of a Nazi bar. Anything else?
The Holden interview is interesting, actually, because we have when he's interviewing Leon and getting a first glimpses of the machine. Why is no one searching people when they come into the building? I mean, that was a small gun, and I know the joke that you can hide it anywhere in your person, but Leon just reached under the table. Is there like not a search parameter? Was there?
So that's actually one of the parts where one of the few conspiracy theories I actually do like digging into it, that no one talks about is because you're right. As soon as he's carrying the same question, he's critically reaching under the table, and a lot of people have argued that he's reaching for somewhere on his person for gun, which, as you point out, is a weird plot hole. I had always been under the impression that the gun was taped under the table. And apparently there was one version of the script where the Blade Runners would sometimes leave unloaded weapons by replicants as another way to kind of get them to come out. Because they pull a gun on you, then obviously they're trying to hide something, and that's a good reason to retire them. But someone switched his guns. He ended up with the empty gun, and the loaded gun got taped on the table by accident. It was cut because it was way too confusing of a subplot, especially early in the film, and it's the right call. But I think that's still lingering in the visual.
Yeah, because that has always been my biggest question: is where did he get that gun?
Right, right. Because it seems like it's one of those things like it seems like an explanation, but then you think about it, it's like going, why is giving a gun to a potential felon a good idea? How is that good? And it's just like it's very Greedo shot first kind of scene.
And on the whole, as replicants are generally stronger and more agile than humans, that doesn't work either, because now you just give them a bludgeoning weapon to beat you to death with.
Right. And that's the other question I've had is like, why are guns even involved? He should just leap across the table and beat this guy to death.
I don't know though. That little pistol packed quite a wallet to knock someone through a wall.
Jesus, yeah, let me tell you. And then they're going to replay that scene. I hope you get used to that dialogue because you're going to hear that dialogue 3 or 4 times
I
throughout
was
this
hoping you
movie.
had a real answer for me in that gun, because otherwise, I'm assuming he's just very flexible and pulled it out of a cavity in his person.
I mean, they're replicants. Maybe they have like little body components you can pop open like a leg and stick a gun
But
in
they're
there,
not. We've established that they are nearly identical to humans.
right? Except for the whole blue blood thing, you know.
What blue blood?
Or is it blue blood? No, it's
Nope.
oh
Shoot
no
them, they
no no.
bleed red.
That's right. That's right. I'm sorry. I'm thinking. I briefly was thinking about Alien for some reason. It's white blood actually.
Give you green, could be a Vulcan.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway,
That's it.
um, Brian has Deckard meet with the CEO of the company that creates the replicants, Eldon Tyrell, who he can administer the VK test on the Nexus 6 to see if it works. Tyrell expresses his interest in seeing the test fail first and asks him to administer it to his assistant, Rachel. After a much longer than standard test, Deckard concludes privately to Tyrell that Rachel is a replicant who believes she is human. Tyrell explains she is an experiment has been given false memories to provide an emotional cushion and that she has no knowledge of her true nature. In searching Leon's hotel room, Deckard finds photos and a scale from a skin of an animal, which is later identified as a synthetic snake scale. Deckard returns to his apartment, where Rachel's waiting. She tries to prove her humanity by showing him a family photo, but Deckard reveals that her memories are implants from Tyrell's niece, and she leaves in tears. Replicants Roy and Leon, meanwhile, investigate a replicant eye manufacturing laboratory and learn of J.F. Sebastian, a gifted genetic engineer who works closely with Tyrell. Chris locates Sebastian and manipulates him to gain his trust. So, the one of the more iconic scenes of Deckard trying to implement the VK test against Rachel. And again, even like the smoking is a noir reference at this point. You know, the curtains with the lights coming through in slats. I mean, this is just one of the more explicitly, obviously visual homages to noir.
Mm-hmm. I thought you were going to say one of the most iconic scenes was going to be Eldon's enormous glasses that you could use to make lasers if you had sunlight.
Well, that that's different level of iconic. But also, I mean, like the huge room, like everything else prior to this have been cramped streets and cramped rooms and cramped cars, and this is a big, huge room to kind of show you the scale and scope of power.
Even her walk across the room towards Deckard is iconic and has been
Hmm.
replayed everywhere.
Yeah, that pencil skirt and that walk. This is
Oh,
a lot of times
the,
if you Google Blade Runner, you're probably going to see pictures of this scene. You know.
yes. And I can't stress enough how good Sean Young is in this movie, because I've seen a couple of Sean Young movies and her very deadpan readings of scripts and things don't work. But in this movie, it is perfect.
Right.
Could you imagine if she'd actually got to be a Catwoman in your favorite Batman movie?
Oh God, that would make that movie less good.
It's such a great scene, just like asking the questions back and forth, and she's questioning him somewhat too at the same time. And
Right.
it is a good. It's not rom-com banter from the 30s, but it is a solid interaction. And you see that he's still trying to just be very professional for everything he's doing, showing that he's competent at his job.
Right. Yeah. No, he's very good at his job. You're right that Rachel is pitched at the right level of is she just a cold person or is she actually a replicant until we finally get the answer. Um, it's very clear that visually we're seeing them meant to be, like you said, like kind of the we're bantering now because we're going to be in bed later thing. The only problem I have is these Harrison Ford and Sean have zero chemistry. Zero.
Who's an actress Harrison Ford has had chemistry with?
Fair shout. I take it back. He was pretty good with what's her name in Temple of Doom.
Kate Capshaw.
Yeah, I think, yeah. But
I think Steven Spielberg's wife at the time, if I remember right.
that's super awkward.
Because he had zero chemistry with Carrie Fisher in
Yep.
the Star Wars stuff.
Yep.
Then and later, zero chemistry with Sean Young. I think pretty much everything I've seen Harrison Ford in, he has not had he's almost at Patrick McGowan level of chemistry with his female co-stars.
Now that you bring it up, yeah, it may just be that he's not a romantic lead, and that just needs to be how life is.
And people think he is, but there's just no spark there. Because Sean Young is beautiful in this movie.
Right. I will. One thing I like though is that how he plays Deckard is the I'm just doing my job, man. Exhaustion during this whole scene, which is actually good. It's this is a waste of my time, and it's taking much longer than anticipated. I have to put a certain amount of energy into these questions because that's required of the test. But even the energy he's putting into the questions compared to the earlier scene, and how the Blade Runner is putting energy into questions, it feels much more muted. Like I just don't want to do this. So I mean, that's right. He feels like he's just I don't want to do this job. I don't want to do this question. I don't want to deal with this asshole CEO. I've got to. So I guess we're doing this.
Well, you almost get that Holden already had Leon pegged the second he came into the room. And so that he was just like condescending and snarky from the jump.
Right.
While you have Deckard, who's trying to figure out if this person's the thing, and it's not as easy as it is for him. It could be because he's good at his job, but he's rusty because he hasn't done it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could just be that world weirdness.
And then so Tyrell explains that he's just give replicants a human life, and therefore makes it easier to hide them. And this is a scene that for a long time confused me, but as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate better, because for younger me was like, why would you tell the people that are designed to find replicants that you've made replicants harder to find, right? And the answer is because he's a rich asshole who thinks he's above the law. I'm like, oh, that makes way more sense now.
And that also means that he gets to charge more for his enslaved people.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because if they're more human, then you as one of the humans left around will pay more to have someone like that.
And he can then go to people and say, I had a Blade Runner test, and he could barely tell, you know?
Yep.
So, I mean, it's like, it's when as soon as you realize, oh, he's just a capitalist fuckwad, it makes so much more sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, all right. Leon's photos after he searches the apartment. Eddie. Roy has seen these incredible sights and everything that he talks about later in the movie. Leon has pictures of Leon in the tub. Like, I feel there's a contrast in the lives they've lived in their short lifespans.
I will point out that the way Leon is portrayed, he is not portrayed as if he is the brightest bulb of the four. But I mean, one thing that earlier cuts of the movie, because this is one I do remember the narration on this pretty vividly, is when Deckard's looking at his photos, the narration says some lines like, he feels like the replicants are trying to pretend to be human, and so they take pictures of very mundane things to make them feel like they actually are human. Which is one of the few points where the narration would have actually clarified things a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
But because I've seen that version stuck in my head a little bit, I now can't see that scene as anything but that. So that part's clear to me, but I completely agree that it requires external knowledge to make that scene clear. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, why is he these extremely boring photos?
Okay, that makes more sense now, because I've only seen the narrated version once, and that was a long time ago.
Still saying, I just have for some reason that stuck in my head.
That takes more, especially given last night when I was looking at my iPad, it popped up like a photo collage of me and one other, and I look at the one other, and it's my dog, and it's just like a photo collage of me and my dog doing totally mundane, stupid stuff. Like, oh, and I felt all warm and fuzzy there. Yes, I understand now. Thank you.
that we like. Well, we have a shared photo gallery between me and my family of just our dog, and like trip photos, 20 photos in there. Personal photos, 15 photos in there. Dog photos, 350. I mean, so it's
And okay, so side story now, so that's what we do on our podcast. Funnily enough, I was running Star Trek, like my second or third game of the new Star Trek for a group of people that came over, and my dog is looks human with the eyes, almost scarily human. And from how she sits on the couch, she sits almost like a person. And so she was sitting on the couch in a different room, staring at us playing a game. And one of the players turned over and looked and said, "Man, your dog is weird." Because human-esque eyes, dog face, sitting like a person on the couch, staring at her.
yep. Dog wants to play, but you won't let the dog play.
No opposable thumbs. You can't roll dice. Um,
Sure.
so I'll give it away for Leon's very mundane photos, and I'll let it go.
Right.
It bothered me until now.
That does lead to one of the another referenced scene, heavily referenced scene, which is the photo enhancement scene. And this scene is fascinating because over the years it has cycled in and out of how implausible it is. Because when I first saw it, I was like, "That's really cool," and then I learned how photography actually works. It's like, "That's really dumb." And then computer photographs became viable, and it's like, "That's really cool." And then I learned how computer photographs work. It's like, "That's really dumb." And now we have AI enhancement of photos and extrapolation of photos. And now I just feel awkward about it because it's like, how much of that is really true and how much of that is computers extrapolating what's in that photo and making shit up and hallucinating.
Why is this a contention point? They are bioengineering people in the movie, and that's not questioned. But the enhancement of a photo is questioned.
Well, specifically the part where the photo can look around corners. He enhances the photo and is able to actually look around a corner at one point on the photo. And I'm just like, that's not how. But okay.
I understand where you're coming from, but I'm just thinking bioengineering human life form seems kind of hard to do. Photo enhancement that they could have taken like an image of the room with, I'm more likely to believe. It's the fact that him enhancing the photo of her is totally irrelevant as he already knows what Zora looks like.
Well, I mean, I think again, this is one of those where I may remembering this from previous versions of the film. But I think the clue is supposed to be Leon and Zora live together, and therefore his idea where because he has Leon's dress. Remember that was repeated at one point, so therefore maybe Zora's probably still at his address.
It still doesn't add any weight to the photo though,
No, I agree. It's
because
way too fucking long to get that relatively minor piece of information.
he already has it, is what I'm saying. He already knows what she looks like. And the piece of stuff that he got from the apartment was already sending out to him, and he was already finding out about it.
Right. Which goes into another noir trope, although I don't think, in this case, I don't think it's intentional, where the American detectives are actually kind of not good at their jobs in some of these movies. Because the mystery is secondary to the larger, interesting characters. And in this case, the actual mystery wasn't much of a mystery to begin with, and is made increasingly clear that there's not much of a mystery to be had in this movie.
Yes.
The other thing I was going to say is, I just one of the things about the movie that no one talks about that I love is the fact that Deckard goes out on the street to find a scientist, to find a very specific kind of scientist who has just a street kiosk with an electron microscope to get information about a snake. And this scientist is like, you know what? I'm just going to put a little pop up here, and I'm going to get enough foot traffic of people wanting to know about bioengineering. And in this world, that's probably true. It's like you're an eyeglass hut, but for bioengineering, you know?
I believe it because that is the world they've built, and I
And I
am
love
more
it.
inclined to believe it from what they've shown me as we've built up to this point.
I know. It's this little thing that like it makes no goddamn sense, but yet the world sells it so convincingly that I completely believe it, and I still believe it to this day. It's like, yes, this woman has a thriving street vendor business, and it's completely true.
Do we want to spend a beat talking about the cybernetic eyes and where Roy and Leon get their clue?
Uh, this poor guy. Yeah, go ahead.
I just think it's a great scene. It's just someone doing their job, and then he pieces together who they are. The thing that I never get though is if you know that they're going to kill you, why do you still tell them what they want to know?
Right.
As a viewer, that's how I feel for most movies. I know they're going to kill me. I'll still tell them what they want to know anyway, but yet they still kill me. That doesn't do anything.
I mean, I think the instinct is like maybe they won't kill me if I do tell them what I want to know, but it's like, dude, you're dead, right?
It's just a nice scene because it's always great to see that actor, and it shows more of the world. And I can't get enough of the world that we're seeing. In any chance I get to see more of it, I enjoy.
Right. And it's again, I mean, I made the kind of throwaway line that a lot of the people of color in this movie are bit characters, and this is one of the ones I mentioned. He dies, but it's interesting to see that uh, two older Japanese actors both getting roles as scientists in a movie in '82. That's actually pretty revolutionary for the time period.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not portrayed as bad at their jobs. Again, one was got a thriving business on the street doing her job. Um, the fact that they're Japanese has not made a big point. It's just how this world is. It ties to again the latent American fear of the Japanese are going to take all of our jobs. So I mean that's not great, but from a pure casting standpoint, they're just playing their roles, and they're just straight up they're just scientists, and I think that's cool. And again, like the scene itself is visually interesting. He's got a parka on. There's all these tubes everywhere. It's visually an interesting scene too, which really helps.
And it keeps reinforcing how enhanced the replicants are, that they're in that freezing cold. They're able to stick their hands in like
Yep.
cryo freezing liquids and everything else, and are totally unfazed.
Hmm.
It's a chance to sort of so they're making them more human than human, but at the same time showing how inhuman they are by the things they're capable of.
Right. Um, I was actually going to talk about this a bit later, but since we're here, talking about now, the way that the replicants end up playing here is they're pitched like they're emotionally children because they live for 4 years. They're just developing their emotions, so they are at the emotional level children. So you're right. It's a good balance of more than human and less than human because they don't quite understand the ramifications of their actions. Intellectually, they do, but emotionally, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not I'm putting my hands into this thing because I'm trying to intimidate you, even though that's the side effect of it. I'm putting my hand in there because I want to get the thing, and because I can't feel pain, I don't have the childlike moment of oh that hurts, I should pull my hand off. So I'm just going to do it because I know I can. So it's a really good for all of the replicants. They're all pitched like they have. I don't. I'm trying to avoid the word stunted emotional growth because that's not exactly what I'm going for. It's that they're new to their emotions, and so they haven't quite got a full grasp of them. And that's what makes them so vibrant compared to the characters because every other character is beat down and worn, a bitter adult, and they're like, life is great. We get to murder people and we get to take stuff. It's awesome. Because if you've had kids, I know you have, but other people listening, if you've had kids, sometimes they're sociopaths.
And that is a great contrast you've just made, because then we go and look at Rachel, who is we know as replicant, who's been implanted with emotions and memories. She is more beat down, like most of humanity is. What does that say about us as people? That's all I got for there.
Okay. A photograph from Leon's apartment and the snake scale lead Deckard to a strip club where Zora works. After a confrontation and a chase, Deckard kills Zora. Bryant also orders him to retire Rachel, who has disappeared from Tyrell Corporation. Deckard spots Rachel in the crowd, but he's ambushed by Leon, who knocks the gun off Deckard's hand and beats him. As Leon is about to kill Deckard, Rachel saves him by using Deckard's gun to kill Leon. They return to Deckard's apartment, and during a discussion, he promises not to track her down. As Rachel abruptly tries to leave, Deckard restrains her and forces her to kiss him, and she ultimately relents. Deckard leaves Rachel's apartment and departs to search for the remaining replicants. So yeah, sexual assault ain't great.
No.
That's one of the areas of the movie I can definitely point to and say this has absolutely not aged well. It wasn't okay then. It's not okay now. It's just not good.
It was still very much a trope for the time, even in like television shows, because that's where you get the Dave and Maddie thing from moonlighting.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there. We could even
See,
give
if I
a
just push her to it, she'll love me. Mm-hmm.
shout out to an earlier Sean Connery movie called, I want to say it was like Marnie, where Sean Connery does that too.
Yeah.
Before Bond, I think too.
Oh yeah, Bond's bad about this.
That's why I went earlier than Bond.
Right. Um, I mean, the only mild point about this scene is that, as we've established, Deckard's an asshole, um, and doesn't care about people's feelings. And the way he's treating Rachel up to this point, he's pretty heavily manipulating her. So him doing this is not out of character. It's just that the movie is also trying to make us sympathetic with Deckard. And so from that perspective, this movie ages badly because the movie's trying to get us on an upward trajectory of getting us invested in Rachel and Deckard as people, but in a modern sensibility, we now hate Deckard much more. And so it's harder to pull back out of that from a modern trajectory.
To a less troublesome scene. I like the strip club scene.
I love how Deckard's idea of going in disguise is to raise his voice slightly and carry a newspaper.
And play a nerd. Essentially, play a nerd. You can just call it out.
I feel like he does me similar in an Indiana Jones movie at one point too.
He did.
Yeah, that voice sounds familiar, and not from this movie.
And to know that Zora kind of spotted him right away and played along with him until she could find a chance to escape.
Right. Which is funny because, like, again, watching it modern day, it's like I could see the logic of there's no way in the world that someone would actually care about the needs of actors or sex workers, and so this is obviously bullshit. And it's pretty clear that's her whole vibe of like, yeah, that's what you're really here for. But I would like to know that there was a guild or an organization that actually had the interests of sex workers at heart that would actually do these kinds of investigations. Like, I want this position to actually exist now.
I want it to exist, but to do more than what he was talking they do is like look for peepholes in the walls.
I know. He's bad at it, but it's like, I wish there was a world where that was a real position that he was pretending to be a part of, rather than something he clearly made up and everyone in the movie knows he clearly made up.
And you get the fact, once again, that Deckard, when he actually has to fight the replicants, is vastly overpowered.
Yes.
Like, she was going to kill him if not for the people that broke in, that were coming into the room.
Mm-hmm.
Which led to the chase scene where she gets killed.
Right. And this is a place where the violence really works for me because, like you said, it's not an action film. There's no way it's an action film. And this actually sells the replicants better, right? Because when both Deckard and Rachel shoot their respective replicants, you very much get feeling like they have no other choice because they're gonna die. It's not. It is gratuitous, but it's not as gratuitous as it could have been. It's they're so powerful, and it's the action is not done in a fun, exciting way. Like the replicants are acting very clearly to defend themselves, but again, not because they don't know their own strength, but because they're emotionally less developed. They're not thinking about the ramifications of it. They just want to escape. They just want to protect themselves. So it's ugly violence, but the movie is still, particularly in its edit, is pretty clear that all of the violence happened because the Blade Runner came up with a gun, and yet the gun is necessary to solve the problem. It's a very much the system sucks and everyone is damaged by it kind of moments, told with low key brutal violence.
Mm-hmm. And if I believe that the scene where Zora dies was actually Scott reshot that for this edit, if I remember right, because he called back Joanna Cassidy to put on the same outfit and do the same run scene to make it better.
25
And
years
she
later.
came back
Wow.
like decades later, still fit the costume and
Wow.
everything.
Good on her. The other thing
It
also is I do like the fact that the nudity is not gratuitous in how it's framed here.
no,
She's just a stripper. Um, and like there's obviously like they're shooting her from the neck up for a lot of it, so you don't see that she's topless. But when she gets getting dressed, there's no lingering on her nudity. It just kind of comes in the shot and then leaves very casually. And I like the fact that it's clearly there to tell part of the story, but it's not lingered upon. And I think the framing of that is that, again, if we look at Deckard as our protagonist, he's our viewpoint character. He doesn't think of her as a sexual object. He thinks of her as just a replicant. So it's a good way of kind of getting into his frame of mind, as it were.
I'm gonna push back on that because I think that I like how the nudity is shot, and she uses her nudity as a weapon against Deckard.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, because he tries to like not look sometimes, but while he's still looking, so there is a part that shows that he is interested in her as more than a replicant, which she then uses for like the put on my bra scene. Is how she catches him
Well,
unawares to then turn it around to try to kill him.
that's fair. I mean, I had always interpreted that as him playing the role. If you're playing a nebbish, nerdy guy, you're going to be awkward around women. But then as soon as he's out of her eyesight, his body language changes. So I didn't interpret that as he's interested in her sexually. Um, and again, the hey, help me with this is the kind. Well, that's kind of what someone I'm pretending to be would do in that moment, right? But I don't think your argument's invalid, right? I think that's another possible interpretation. I'm just bringing my own interpretation to it. I don't think I think both of us can come away from that with our interpretations, and they're both valid.
I'm also extrapolating some of that from the association he's having with Rachel, who he knows is replicant, and he's already having feelings for her, who he
That's a good
calls
point.
during this scene before he sees Laura.
That's actually a good point. I hadn't thought about that part. That might be true. Okay, I can see that. Regardless,
Which
it is done well because it's so many of the movies would have made that into the look how sexy and hot she is.
yeah, and the Leon scene though is just
So heartbreaking.
essentially torturing him, trying to show him what it's like to live in fear, is a beautiful scene.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm. Yeah, and like Leon is one of those. I mean, he's Zora's the character with least screen time. Leon has probably second least screen time. But in the short space, you really get the impression that he is not dumb. He just has trouble expressing himself because in that scene, he has a very nuanced thing he wants to communicate. I'm feeling this way. I want you to feel this way too. Right. It's just that it's clear Leon struggles to fit in. I think is probably the best way to describe it. And if you go back to that earlier investigation scene, like he's answering questions. He's trying to be helpful. It's just he's doing it in a slightly awkward way. And I think I worry that the emergent tension was, oh, he's dumb, but that's not how the actor's not portraying it that way. The actor's portraying it as like he just doesn't fit. And so when you have that moment of him going, yeah, I want you to live in fear, it's because Leon's been scared this whole time, which is it's a great moment. In this violent scene, you start to flip your expectations on how the replicants fit into everything. The only other thing is because this is like the last big street scene. One of the things I love about this movie and older cyberpunk is the just utter graveyard of dead brands that people thought were going to be big in the future, like the Schlitz sign, the Pan Am building, the Atari building, TDK. Just all these brand names. They go, this is obviously going to be a huge brand. It's like, no, nobody. That's not how the future turned out. I want to live in a world where Schlitz is still a major beer brand, but that is not the world we live in, my friend.
oh god,
Anything else?
no, not for this.
All right. Roy arrives at Sebastian's apartment and tells Pris that the other replicants are dead. Sebastian reveals that because of a genetic premature aging disorder, his life will be cut short, just like the replicants that were built with a 4-year lifespan. Roy uses Sebastian to gain entrance to Tyrell's penthouse. He demands more life from his maker, which Tyrell says is impossible. Roy confesses he has done questionable things, but Tyrell dismisses this, praising Roy's advanced design and accomplishments in his short life. Roy kisses Tyrell and then kills him by crushing his skull. Sebastian tries to flee and is later reported dead. So now we have a huge chunk of the film that's just about the replicants. And we didn't really talk about Sebastian too much, but he's kind of the bridge between humanity and replicants, right? He's built them, so he's ultimately responsible for them. He has a certain kind of almost fatherly interest in them, and he has a life condition that parallels their life condition, but also he still looks at them as things. He talks about all the automatons he's made and calls them as his friends, but it's clear that he still views the replicants as nothing more than a slightly more advanced version of the toys he makes.
Mm-hmm. Which part of this character though parallels, I think, a character that was in the original novel that also helped the replicants.
Right.
I don't remember a lot about that character though.
I don't think it was this nuanced, honestly.
And
Um,
it is nice to seeing Daryl, I think, from
yeah,
New Heart doing something else.
yeah. And Pris is. It's actually funny because Pris is more sexually coded than Zora was. Because the way they frame her and her body language, she's clearly seducing Sebastian, right?
Well, if we think back to their bio breakdowns, though,
She was a
Pris
pleasure
was
model,
like their
right?
pleasure model compared to
Mm,
Zora, who was a part of a hit squad or something like that.
right, right. And so it's, which sets up a whole another argument of what women are drawn to when they're not able to engage in the industry that they're best suited for and are forced to turn to sex work just to accomplish anything in their lives. Um, but you're right. Pris, she uses the tools she has available and the tools she's been built with. So she leans on seduction. Lots of touching Sebastian. And what's interesting is that Roy starts to mirror Pris's body language. So I've always kind of felt that Roy, if he was not a pleasure model, maybe he's starting to incorporate some of the pleasure model programming or things into his programming.
I think they said something like he was a perfect combat model that could like adapt to every situation. I think is what it
Yeah,
was.
maybe that was it. Maybe that's it. Yeah.
And you know what I would like? I'd like to applaud us so far that I'm about to break is how we have not at all mentioned Bubblegum Crash up to this point with Chris.
Somehow. Well, because Bubblegum Crash was a Terminator ripoff. We know that. Not a Blade Runner ripoff.
Unless you call your lead actress Chris. That's all I'm
I know,
saying.
I know, I know, I know. We talked about during Bubblegum Crash was that the Air Crisis that was inspired by many of these movies. Let's put it that way. But then, like, one of the things I love about Roy Batty as a character is that he's again complex emotionally is not the right word. His emotions path is pretty simple. It's just that it's confusing because of the person he is, and it feels natural. So yes, I can love Tyrell for what he's done to me, and also jam my thumbs into his eye sockets, and that doesn't feel like a contradiction in terms.
So was this also one, if I remember right, I'm trying to remember where I heard this one or watched this one, is that one of the original endings though that they had in mind was that when Roy jams his fingers into his eyes, and my preferred version is when he says fucker instead of father, but I digress. When he jammed in the like little parts was supposed to pop out, and you're supposed to see that Terrell was also replicant.
Oh my god.
And then Roy was supposed to have like gone up to the tower and seen like all these little other Terrells and everything else and know that it was pointless. But they came back to how can we show little mechanical bits to show that he's a replicant? because none of the other ones have it. And that Tyrell had already died, so that was
It's amazing how much these stories change based on technical limitations.
mm-hmm. Which would have been interesting to see. Which would also explain why Tyrell is trapped on Earth, though, because we have most people of wealth and affluence are able to leave Earth.
That's true. And if I remember right, isn't the Tyrell Corporation also in one of the Alien movies?
I couldn't remember, so I didn't mention if it was linked or not. I
Okay.
feel like it is, but I don't know well enough.
Yeah. So I mean, feel free to people listening go look it up. But I believe there is a Blade Runner Alien movie franchise connection, but I do not. I believe it's the Tyrell Corporation. But I'm not 100% sure on that.
Maybe we should cover Alien someday. At least
Yeah,
the
maybe we
first
should.
two-ish.
Yes, because they're two very different movies.
I refuse to watch Alien 3, but that's a digression.
Yeah.
It's a good scene. It is, and you're getting solid acting. The thing that I want to touch on here is that part of people say that part of the reasons in the very ending why something that Roy did shows that Deckard is replicant isn't true, because we have Roy's change in this scene. Like, he's killed humans, kills Eldon, and you hear him say, "I'm sorry, Sebastian," before he kills Sebastian.
Mm-hmm.
To show like the humanity like switch over, and that he's regretting now having to kill this guy who has done nothing but help him, which leads to a later action that he does.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, because Roy Batty has a character arc. He's evolving, changing, and as you pointed out, like that's the core point of this movie is that these people have more humanity than the alleged humans. So making everyone replicant just utterly destroys that storyline.
That's it. I just wanted to touch on Roy's switch here. That's going to become very important in a second.
Okay, well, let's finish up. At Sebastian's apartment, Deckard is ambushed by Pris, but he kills her as Roy returns. Roy's body begins to fail as the end of his lifespan nears. He chases Deckard through the building and onto the roof. Deckard tries to jump onto another roof but is left hanging from the edge. Roy makes the jump with ease, and as Deckard's grip loosens, Roy hoists him onto the roof to save him. Before Roy dies, he laments that his memories will be lost in time like tears in the rain. Gaff arrives to congratulate Deckard, also reminding him that Rachel will not live, but then again, who does? Deckard returns to his apartment to retrieve Rachel. While escorting her to the elevator, he notices a small origami or unicorn on the floor. He recalls Gaff's words and departs with Rachel. That is the end of the original movie. Now, do you want me to briefly tell you what the original theatrical happy ending was?
I know it, but please tell our listeners in case they don't.
Rachel was not actually a replicant the entire time. She was actually a human. So they can live forever. She didn't have a limited lifespan. No wonder that ending is dead. No one has seen a movie. No one has seen the ending in over 25 years, and there's a reason, because it's stupid.
I'm going to quibble. I don't think he ever says she's a human. He says he looked at her lifespan and it was unlimited or whatever. They never say she's a human.
I have not watched it recently enough to be able to go into the details of it. Suffice to say, it was a very clearly an ending to appease test screenings.
And part of that ending is also going to influence like Blade Runner 2049.
Oh, I had forgotten about that.
Because we know that we're dealing with Nexus 6s here, and at no point did they ever say that Rachel was a Nexus 6.
Right.
He says he wants to see what a negative test is like.
Oh, you're right. No, that's right. Because I'll say, but no, you're right. He came there to test a Nexus 6. Tyrell says first she was a negative thing against her, and then he said she's a new breed of replicant, which implies she's not a Nexus 6, but a different model. So yes,
correct.
You're correct.
Yeah,
you're right.
It's semantics and wordplay, which I fucking love. Love it.
Right. Suffice to say, the original ending is garbage. I don't like it.
No. Correct. Do you also know the footage that they took for that of them like riding on that path out into the woods and everything else?
Oh, in the original ending?
Yeah. Footage from The Shining. Because in The Shining, they had so much helicopter footage of like them doing that. They're like, they use that for that ending.
Yeah, that's actually funny because I always felt like Roy shoving his head through the wall was meant to be a Shining reference. So that's even funnier that they took the actual footage from The Shining. That's amazing.
So before we go any more to the ending, since we're at the end and we're talking about it, the unicorn dream scene that we did not really get into.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? As people say that that's why Deckard is a replicant, because he had that dream about a unicorn, then Gaff leads a little unicorn that Rachel almost steps on.
That's so flimsy. No, so I have a different approach to that. Is that this is the part where I feel like the Philip K. Dick influence is perhaps lost on people, is because again, Philip K. Dick is a very dabbles a lot with surrealism in his writing, and also dabbles with dream logic a fair bit in his writing. And from the time that Deckard meets Rachel, his life starts to go less and less by real world logic and more by dream logic. If the idea that things get increasingly more surreal as the movie goes on, I don't think it invalidates the plot of the movie, but it does help to understand that like Deckard starts to dream things, and then the things he's dreaming come into reality. Um, you know, Rachel suddenly has his gun and is able to protect him. Roy, and when they chase through the building, the corridors don't quite make sense. The layout of the building doesn't quite make sense, and it just seems like he's running down endless corridors. It feels like a dream you're stuck in. So I have always interpreted that as just his life is becoming more dreamlike because he's fallen out of the real world into the world that the replicants are trying to hold. Because again, they are like children on some level, and so their logic doesn't quite map up to adult logic. So as he's pulled into the world of replicants, their logic starts to take over a bit more. Um, Granted, that's me more enjoying surreal cinema and wanting to put that level onto it. Um, and I think that adding the unicorn dream thing helps to cement that approach because without that scene, it's harder to justify a more surreal dream logic approach.
Hmm.
It the sort of kind of becomes well, it just kind of falls apart near the end of it. Um, I feel like that helps add that there. Um, I do not get the Deckard dreamed a unicorn, Gaff put a unicorn down in origami, therefore Deckard's a replicant. It's like there's a few steps in the middle there that I don't quite see happening.
Part of me is imagining that when someone briefed Scott about the book, one of the pieces that he picked up is that, so this is me trying to remember, is that the Mercer was sort of a religious movement, and Mercer was sort of like their big person, and there was a lot of crushing, sort of like was a saint that sort of got crushed under rocks. And then in the book, during Deckard's investigation, he sort of gets hit and almost crushed under rocks in a similar form towards the end of the story. So part of
Okay.
me thinks Scott went, and added the unicorn and then put that other unicorn's reference from like the dream, because Deckard was having like dreams or visions of like Mercer thing happening to him. And then at the end, it happened to him, which somewhat goes back to how Philip K. Dick wrote. There was a lot of like psychic powers and everything else in the world too. And that came from drug use and other stuff. And I won't go into that today.
All right.
And I think that is Scott replicating that. But Scott
I can live
himself
with
has said that Deckard's a replicant, but everyone else is like, Dick said he wasn't a replicant. Ford thinks he's a replicant. And if he's a replicant, doesn't make sense for the story. I just want to hammer that home one last time.
Yeah. I mean, I would more likely believe that Gaff is a psychic and read Deckard's mind, and the unicorn's threat saying, "I can find you anywhere and kill your girlfriend." That would much more likely buy
Yeah.
than Deckard's a replicant.
So I think we're in closing now. Any final closing thoughts on Blade Runner? Like this is it has the scene, which was Roy's, and then a great ending here. That's the real ending where should have them running for the elevator and the door closing, not a speech afterwards, not them like on the road riding somewhere, but like this is a perfect sort of new Ars ending.
Right, exactly. It's the you don't know what's going to happen. Um, and again, like Gaff's unicorn is much more explicitly a threat in this version. It's the I can find you, so you can run. Um, so yeah, I mean, I like the movie. I'm with you. It's not a movie I can casually put in. I have to pay attention to it. And to be fair, last two times I've watched it have been for critical purposes. I haven't just gone, oh, I'm gonna watch Blade Runner. Um, it is. It has problems. Some intrinsic to the film, as we talked about. Some indicative of the time period. Some just the nature of this weird amorphous beast that has only had a final form in the last 15 years of its life. Uh, it's but it's up there with Star Wars in the sense of it's kind of hard to talk about how influential it is because the more you think about it, the more you can find references to it, right? It's anything that involves near future dystopia, intentionally or not, is probably referencing Blade Runner. There are certainly people who probably have never seen Blade Runner, but because they're referencing other media they know, are inadvertently referencing Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm. It's it is a movie that I think I first saw when I was around 10 or 11,
Mm,
and even then, it was slow for me then, but I liked it and I couldn't stop watching it. I think over the course of my life, I've probably seen this movie about 10 times
mhm,
because it is so good and engaging for me as a viewer and what I look for in media. I see
mhm.
an array of problems with it. I've mentioned some of them now in passing, but it is so intrinsically engaging that I can't overlook those, but I can move past them to enjoy it for what it's trying to do.
And I
And that
have to
says
say,
everything I need to say about it.
yeah, I mean, I have to say, as we've done this, I think I have grown more to appreciate films that are made a bit messily, or media, I should say, is made a bit messily. Um, Even Twin Peaks, the I think I liked the original TV show more than the sequel because um, there were there were network admonitions, and they had to adapt to the structures they were in, and they had to constantly adjust the script because of actors being unavailable or because of the needs of the storyline or what the media were saying. Having something that's not as completely in a creative control makes it more interesting on some level. And I think Blade Runner is kind of the same way, like because it was it's never finalized in some level, right? I mean, yes, the final cut 2007 came out, but it is one of the more fan edited films out there. Star Wars is like the biggest one, but um, there are people still trying to put together what they think is the distinctive version of it. Um, One cut, it's simply the final cut with a few minor changes, but it's done in black and white. And even just seeing the film in black and white changes the approach to it because it's closer to its noirish roots, you know?
That'd be amazing. I may have to track
Yeah,
that down.
yeah, it's actually not bad. Um, so, I mean, there's this feeling that even culturally that this film is not quite finished. And I think that's probably the incentive for eventually, there's been sequels talked about for Blade Runner for decades. So I mean, the fact that it eventually happens isn't a huge surprise at all.
Well, part of
I
it
it's
also
a,
goes into the Philip K. Dick thing is how could we do a sequel to something? Like people
right,
didn't think this was filmable, then how can we make a sequel to something that was already unfilmable?
right. Um, but there's a Blade Runner role playing game. Was a Blade Runner video game that was actually extremely well received because we haven't talked about it much, but it came out in the 90s, early 2000s. Um,
I think it was
and
90s.
one of the distinctive things about the Blade Runner video game is that the game randomizes who is a replicant before each gameplay.
And the other thing though is I think it was the first game that did 3D modeling along with something else in the game itself. So it was like a monumental first step
Rotoscoping,
towards
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Hmm.
So incredible. And it was a side quel. You're playing it. I may have owned the game and played it. You're playing a different character who is a Blade Runner doing your own stuff while Deckard's stuff is going on, and some of the characters overlap slightly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so there's always been this, and you said there's three novels. So there's always been this need to like Blade Runner needs to be completed somehow. That there is a idealized form that exists somewhere that if we could only possibly unearth it, and the answer is that will never happen. And to me, that's one of the appeals of the movie is the fact that it's for a movie made in '82. It's still weirdly an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, and
So
I
yeah,
think
it's
there was a
fascinating.
comic book run. There's
There
also,
was.
I don't know if it's
There's a
still
new one.
happening, but there's talk of a TV series.
Yeah, there's talk about that. I know that there was an original comic book run. There's a new one Dynamite put out. They actually have Blade Runner 2019. They actually have like a few different series, and like one during the movie, one during 2049, and then like one that's kind of between those two movies. Um, so yeah, there's a ton of spin-off media. But again, all the spin-off media is weirdly respectful of what they think the movie set down, but because what the movie set down is amorphous, it's all slightly different from each other too. It's fascinating. It's not quite canonical with each other, but also it all tries to take the original movie as itself canonical in their own what they believe to be the canon interpretation of it.
And every so often I do say this, but Blade Runner is one of those IPs I would love to be able to get my creative hands on and do something with.
Hmm.
It is
Yeah, yeah.
it is in my top 10 I would like to do that for.
I mean, I would love to play a game where you have to try to a replicant trying to pretend to be human. Like imagine a Blade Runner dating sim where you're a replicant trying to convince someone that you're actually a human. Amazing.
Wow. So next time we're gonna cover, I know you'll be shocked, Blade Runner 2049. The thing that
What?
we haven't discussed, that I'll do now live on recorded air. Eddie, do we want to try to cover those little prequels in the middle of Blade between these two, or do we want to leave those alone?
Let's just leave those alone because they're hard to track down. Let's just talk about the two movies, and then afterwards, if people are excited about, hey, let's talk about more Blade Runner stuff, then we can maybe do another kind of come back to it and say let's talk about some of the stuff in the middle there.
Oh, you mean like the actual prequels, then the actual novel, then the follow-up novels, the comic books? We could do like a whole Blade Runner season easily.
Seriously, yeah. I mean, just go through different Blade Runner media. The GOG.com has a playable version of that Blade Runner game now that you can buy.
I feel like an enhanced edition came out in
There was controversy
2000,
around that. Yeah.
in 2020. I can't remember. There was.
Yeah, there was I'm trying to remember, but like they used some technology to kind of make it look better and end up making it look worse. And then they as a result of the port, borked some of the code, screwed something up. So like it was not it was a
Eh,
botched release, but apparently they fixed it all that now.
all right. Then that's a no for that. And we could wrap up that whole Blade Runner run with us playing the Blade Runner game.
There you go. Yeah, a version of the Free League. Free League has Blade Runner license.
It's on my shelf back there, and it's built to be a really a GM and like one or two players.
Nice. Yeah, well, maybe we'll. So let us know if you want that. But otherwise, we will see you next week when we talk about Blade Runner 2049.
I'll be seeing you.